Get ready for a journey into the heart of Bridgeport politics with In Absentia, a new podcast from Connecticut Public's investigative team, The Accountability Project. Learn about the city's past and present political dysfunction and the systems that enable it. Tune in wherever you get your podcasts.
Funding provided by Gregory Melville and Susan Fox and Kathleen Bromage.
This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. For the first time, the EPA has set limits on PFAS chemicals in drinking water. PFAS stands for perfluoroalkyl and polyfluoroalkyl substances, which is a group of man-made chemicals that have been used since the 1940s to waterproof and stain-proof products from clothing, makeup, and furniture to firefighting foam and semiconductors. Coming up, we discuss these forever chemicals and what the rule means for Connecticut with Department of Public Health Commissioner Manisha Juchani. But first, State Attorney General William Tong filed 2 lawsuits against 28 chemical manufacturers. He says they're responsible for knowingly contaminating Connecticut waters and natural resources and harming public health. And joining us now is Attorney General William Tong himself. General Tong, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
And for our listeners, let us know if you have any questions for Attorney General Tong. Give us a call at 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So before we get to the status of the lawsuits, Attorney General Tong, do you mind reminding our listeners, what are PFAS or forever chemicals and what's your sense of their harm?
Yeah, they're chemicals that are in everything and in all of us. 99.9% of all of us Americans have PFAS in our blood, and it's in the water supply. And that's why they're not just forever chemicals, but they're everywhere chemicals, and they're in almost everything from nonstick pots and pans. It's PFAS is basically industrial Teflon. It's what makes your pots and pans nonstick, to shampoo, to toothpaste, to Gore-Tex, outerwear, and then other major industrial applications like firefighting foam.
And what led you to the point of filing these lawsuits? What's the legal case?
So I first started hearing about PFAS on a large scale when I became Attorney General, now hard to believe, 6 years ago. And the focus at that time was on so-called natural resources damages or damages to the environment. We knew that PFAS was everywhere. We knew it didn't go away, that it stayed in the environment forever, that it was very hard to remediate. But the science around the harm to people and to animals was still developing at that time. And now we know that PFAS is linked to a host of cancers, including liver cancer, that it is linked to infertility, to low birth weight, to diabetes. And so very serious physical harms to public health and to humans and animals. And so because of that and the natural resources damages, we're compelled to step in and we've sued most of the major chemical manufacturers in this country, including 3M and DuPont, who are responsible for producing these chemicals.
And so we've had this conversation before, and we know that this is not new information or new news, really. But can you talk about, what is the status of these lawsuits today?
So they're really just beginning. I just recently announced in the last few months 2 major fronts in our litigation. One against the companies that produce PFAS broadly, and then another lawsuit focused on the companies that produce firefighting foam, or AFFF foam, which is still in use. It's being phased out. But AFFF foam is the foam that's used to put out highly volatile and basically really hot and very serious fires, particularly in industrial settings like airports. And AFFF foam has been used for years, for example, at places like Bradley, and was used for major fires, including we had a very serious fire of a crash involving vintage airplanes a few years ago, and As a result of that, we had to put it out with AFFF foam, and the foam then leaches into the environment, into the water supply.
And so we have a Connecticut Mirror investigative reporter, Andrew Brown, who was able to confirm that the lawsuits your office filed were recently transferred to federal court. Can you talk about the significance of that and also if your litigation is being put together with other similar lawsuits happening in South Carolina?
Yes, this is a common maneuver. It's called removal when a defendant or set of defendants tries to get out of state court where they perceive that in Connecticut state court, the state of Connecticut is in a better position. And they try to move it to federal court where the defendants think they'll get a better judge or better circumstances. That's not necessarily true, but that's just a common maneuver in their perception. It's interesting. This has a lot of parallels to our climate case against ExxonMobil. We also allege in that case that ExxonMobil lied to Connecticut and the American people about the fact of climate change and climate science since the 1950s, about the same time that 3M and DuPont knew about PFAS and the harms to all of us in the environment. They tried to remove in that case to get out of state court, and they lost. And so those cases are going back to state court. And so we expect the same thing to happen here. They'll try to remove to federal court. We expect to beat them on the removal question and bring them back to state court.
And you mentioned 3M earlier too, and before filing these two suits, your office had objected to the terms that the 3M settlement when it was announced in June, and that particular settlement was finalized earlier this month. So, how would you differentiate this suit specific to private water systems?
Well, we weren't involved in that suit directly as parties,
Okay.
although what 3M tried to do in that suit is basically through the back door extinguish the state's claims against 3M. We were able to fight that and beat that back, and basically we caught them in the act of trying to use that lawsuit to shut down the state of Connecticut in our claims. But basically, my concern, and it's still my concern, is that it's too early to settle on these terms and not enough money and not enough certainty. And basically these private water systems, including some in Connecticut, were being asked to sign away their rights when we don't know what the future holds. So yeah, sure, they get a little money now, and they would try to confront the issue now, particularly that EPA is ratcheting up the requirements for us to remediate PFAS. But I just thought that on balance, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough money, frankly, for them to sign away their rights in the future, and they would be left holding the bag. All of us would be left holding the bag to remediate PFAS when the true scale and cost is known.
And we were talking about private water systems earlier, and also public water systems were able to opt out of that 3M settlement during a very short window. I think it's about
Yeah.
20 or so days. Can you explain what that means and whether, any Connecticut utilities may have opt out?
Yeah, I don't have the current rundown of who opted in and opted out because we're not in that case. But suffice it to say, that was one of my major objections, which was this is too quick, not enough money, not enough certainty, and it was not a settlement that I would have signed.
And a year ago, we were talking about the EPA setting standards for these, and now a year later, we're talking about the EPA limits that were finalized this month. Are you heartened by the progress that's happening right now?
I'm heartened, and at the same time, I'm girding for, the long fight ahead of us to pay the cost of remediation. Again, to liken it to climate change. Sure, I've taken action. Yes, I feel good about our claims, but the task ahead of us in addressing the problem, the lawsuit's one thing.
Right.
The real issue is how do we deal with this public health hazard and environmental problem long term? The scale is huge, probably unknowable, and the cost similarly huge, and in some ways unfathomable. So when you talk about something that is so ubiquitous, that lasts basically forever and is in all of our bloodstreams, That is a huge undertaking. Now, of course, the response is not to throw up your hands and say, why bother? We have to fight it, and we have to try to find ways to, as cost effectively as possible, remediate the problem.
Well, and then building with what you just said too, the fact that this is we don't even know how large the scale is. It's everywhere. It's forever. It's unfathomable. And so, I mean, this is one of those questions where what resources are available? I think most people don't want to throw up their hands, but what can be done? What's practical to be done right now? And what resources are available and what's needed for water utilities to either test for PFAS or to avoid it if they aren't already starting that?
Yeah, we have to choose from, just a set of bad options, right? There are no good answers, and that's kind of what I do every day. It's sort of the nature of my job is to look at a really tough situation, know there aren't any good answers or clear answers, and try to make your best judgment. I think there are some technologies that are available now, some filtration technologies. One private water system tells me it's at least $130 million just to get this off the ground. That's a huge number for them. And so we've got to go one community, one water supply at a time and try to put this together. We got something like 6,300 different sites that we know about that need to be addressed and remediated, and we've just got to get to it.
And I think there has been concerns that was raised that a lot of the costs will end up coming out from the consumer. So do you have concerns that rates for water bills could increase in order to help cover this cost?
Yeah, of course, I'm concerned about that, all of that, and where the money is going to come from, which is why I'm pursuing these 30-something chemical companies so aggressively, and why I'm going to make them pay. 3M and DuPont are two of the biggest companies on earth, and there have been some maneuvers by DuPont to avoid liability, and we're chasing them, just like I chased Purdue and the Sacklers, even though they try to hide behind various legal maneuvers. The challenge for all of us too is, and this is a difficult balance, the numbers are so big that we could easily put them out of business. And if everybody got what they were demanding in terms of a judgment, that would probably put 3M out of business many times over. And so you have to balance too, how much you can extract from them, and try to avoid putting them out of business, because if you put them out of business, then you go into bankruptcy and you risk not getting anything. So there's this difficult balance, frankly, that I guess it's a difficult dance, but you have to try to position it so that you can get a huge recovery to pay for remediation while having a defendant who can continue to pay.
And clearly, this is an ongoing situation. And as you continue that difficult dance, Attorney General Tong, any final thoughts for our listeners before we let you go?
Well, I guess I would say this, which is when you hear about a huge environmental issue like this, public health issue, there's a temptation to throw up your arms, and then B, some people get really worried, and what I don't want people to do is to panic and focus too much on it, so that it really impairs people in their lives and going about their everyday tasks and focusing on raising their families and doing their jobs. But what I do want to communicate to people is that it is a huge issue, that we have to have this conversation at the local and state level and the federal level, and that we're going to have to make huge investments, and people need to be ready for that, because it's not something that it affects only a certain segment of the population. It's not something that just a few of us caused or are responsible for. We all use these products. They're everywhere, and we've got to confront it together.
You've been listening to Connecticut Attorney General William Tong. Thank you so much for being with us this morning, General Tong.
Thank you.